Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Filing season reminder. An extension to file is not an extension to pay taxes. COVID tax tip 2021-62 May 5th, 2021. For most individual taxpayers, the tax filing payment deadline was postponed to May 17th. Those who need more time to file beyond the postponed date can request an extension to file. The taxpayers must request an extension to file by May 17th, or they may face a failure to file penalty. This extension gives them until October 15th to file their tax return. An extension to file is not an extension to pay. And that looks to be the main point of what they're driving at. The IRS is saying, hey, if you owe us money at this point in time, just because you go on extension, you should still be paying us the money. Well, what if I don't? What happens if I don't pay you the money? Well, then they're going to charge you penalties and interest on it, and you'll probably owe more money after that point in time. So bottom line, there was an extension of the time to file, April 15th to the May 17th. And then if you owe money at that point in time, at the filing date, then you'd still want to make the payment in order to avoid the penalties and interest. You can then file for an extension. The extension will then reduce, hopefully remove, the penalties and interest related to the late filing, but not related to the possible late payment. If you file the extension by the May 17th now, then the end date is kind of the normal end date as it has been in the past, which will be the October 15th. So October 15th end date for the extension is the same. That hasn't moved as of now. The beginning date had moved from the April to the May 17th as to when you need to file. Remember the general rules when you pay the IRS, when you owe money to the IRS. Well, before I get into that, just note that the bottom line here is that if you are getting a refund from the IRS, then you probably don't have to worry so much about the difference between whether you owe them or not if you plan on going on extension, because you simply want to file the extension in that case, and the IRS is not so worried about any problems with the payment because they owe you money. So you're basically giving them a loan. So if you expect a refund at this point in time, they're basically giving you're basically giving the IRS a loan. They're happy to pay you later as long as you basically inform them, file the extension, and keep in communication, and then file the tax return at a later point. Now, if they owe you money, or if you owe them money, then that's where the problem could come into play, because the filing of the extension does not mean that you extend the time to pay, and then normally you would need to make an estimated payment at the point in time you file the extension. Now, you might be asking how am I going to file or know how much to pay them when I haven't filed the tax return? And you're going to have to estimate it because that's what you got to do. So normally you file the tax return in order to know if and how much money you owe them. If you don't have the bookkeeping or whatever is necessary to file the tax return, but you think that you're going to owe them, then you may still want to estimate how much you're going to owe them so that you can avoid the penalties and interest. So just remember the general rule on the payments to the IRS, and this can differ for many people if their work situation has changed, especially if they're picking up gig work or Schedule C kind of business work. It normally works that the IRS wants to get paid during the year as the year goes, which is complicated because the tax returns are getting more and more complicated. The tax system has been based on a system where you had a one-income household, and that one person worked at the same job their entire life, and that makes it a lot easier to basically kind of predict what the taxes will be, even with a complex, progressive tax system where the tax rates change as you go. Obviously, now we have multiple people working in one home, and people are switching jobs all the time at this point in time, and possibly picking up other jobs like gig work and that kind of thing, which can complicate the payments. So normally in a W-2 type of situation, if you're an employee, the employer takes the money out of your paycheck and pays it to the government as the year happens during the year. So if we're talking 2020, they've already paid. And normally when you get a refund at the end of the year, that's because you overpaid basically on purpose through this system, because we have no idea what the tax will actually be because it's way too complex. And then you're going to get a payment back in order to avoid penalties and interest that could result if you were to underpay them. Now, if people work and they move to things like gig work, especially, then it becomes much more complex because now you might have to actually pay the IRS. And that's when you get into the situation of Now you have to actually estimate what your taxes are, without the use of the W-4 and going through your employer possibly, but actually figure out for yourself and predict how much you're going to owe the IRS. And it gets complicated because it's a progressive tax system, and then pay the IRS. So you still have that same obligation. So if you're moving from a W-2 type of situation to a situation where you're picking up gig work or Schedule C type of work, note that you might have to adjust your withholdings. And if that's not sufficient to cover the income you might get somewhere else where you don't have any withholdings, you're going to have to make the estimated payments. So that would need to happen quarterly. And then if you still owe anything as of when the tax return is filed, then of course you want to make that payment. That's where we would be at this point in time. You want to make that payment in order to avoid the penalties and interest. And again, the common question is, I don't know how much I owe. That's why I'm going on extension, because I got this gig work or something going on. And I can't figure it out. Well, then again, you kind of have to estimate it at that point if you want to avoid the penalties and interest that might be there if there's an underpayment. So taxes must be paid by May 17th to avoid penalties and interest on the amount owed after that date. How to request an extension to file. To get an extension to file, the IRS urges taxpayers to do one of the following. File Form 4868 through their tax professional tax software or by using free file on Irs.gov. So Form 48, the filing of an extension is quite straightforward. If you're getting a refund, if you think you're getting a refund, then what you're trying to do, if you don't want to file the tax return yet and you want an extension, then is simply file the form, because they owe you money in that situation. And so you don't have to really worry about this payment situation because they owe you money. You don't owe them money in that situation. So you could file the form by simply filing it. Look at the form here. There's a link to it, and fill out the form that way. You can use tax software from your tax professional, but you don't really need a tax professional if you're just going on extension. Generally, if you have a tax professional, then they'll probably do it maybe even for free. If you do not, then you can do it with the form, or you can use software, and you can use the free file software typically, which are here. There's a link to that here. The IRS will have a page that kind of goes through some of the common or brand name third-party softwares, and you get free access to their software if their income is below a certain threshold. Now, if you're just using the software to file an extension, then possibly your income would be below the threshold, and you can simply file the extension. Or maybe, and I'm not sure exactly how it works, you might be able to fill out the tax return using their software and determine whether or not you owe money or not. And maybe you don't have to pay for it until, to file an extension. Maybe the extension would be free, but to file the tax return would cost you money. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but you might be able to get access in any case to that form and the filing process through the free software, so you can check that out. Submit an electronic payment with direct pay, electronic federal tax payment system, or by debit, credit card, or digital wallet, and select Form 4868 or extension as the payment type. So now, if they owe you money, you expect a refund from the IRS, then obviously you're not going to choose this method of paying them because you don't owe them any money. So if they owe you money and you still want to go on an extension, you need to file the Form 4868. Now, if you owe them money, then you're probably going to still have to use the software so that you can figure out an estimate of how much you owe them so that you can then make a payment to them. So you might do the same thing and use the free file software to figure out how much you owe them, and then hopefully use that software to generate the Form 4868 and possibly make the payment. Or you can make the payment separate. You might use the software to figure out how much you owe and then make the payment separate, or you might just guess how much you might owe them and then make the payment. Now, by making the payment to them, you want to assign it. You have to tell the IRS what you're paying them for. If they assign your payments to the wrong thing, then they may still charge you penalties and interest. In other words, if you tried to make the payment for the Form 4868, but you accidentally assigned it to payroll taxes or to the next year's taxes for 2021 or to the prior year taxes, then the IRS might, assign it there and then say you didn't pay the 4868 and still charge you penalties and interest. So when you make the electronic payment, you got to make sure that you're assigning it to the proper thing, which in this case would be the Form 4868. So if you use these electronic payments and you owe them money, as long as you do the proper assigning of that payment to the form 4868, then that payment in and of itself assigned to the proper form should notify the IRS that you are going on extension. So you could do it in that format as well by simply making the payment. They have the options up top to do so. Note that the credit card, I think there's a small fee, not from the IRS, but from the credit card company. So the direct pay and the electronic federal tax payment system, I think there's no charge to you by using those ones, I don't think. So an automatic extension of time to file will process when taxpayers pay all or part of their taxes electronically by Monday, May 17th due date. Some taxpayers may have extra time to file their tax return and pay any taxes due. This includes some disaster victims, taxpayers living overseas, including members of the military, and eligible support personnel serving in combat zones. So these are people that may fall into a situation where they get an automatic extension. So if you were a victim of a disaster, or if you're serving in the military and you're in a combat zone, then the IRS is gracious enough to give you a little bit more time to pay your taxes. So then we have more information down below, more good reading material here, which is the IRS extension extends additional tax deadlines to May 17th. What is the due date of my federal tax return, or am I eligible to request an extension? Tax topic 653, IRS notices and bills, penalties, and interest charges. There's links to that reading material here. There'll be a link to this in the description.